You all know my guest, Katherine Stewart, because she's been the canary in the coal mine when it comes to Christian nationalism. In 2020, just before that year's presidential election, she published The Power Worshippers, all about the threat of that movement. It even inspired the documentary God and Country. If you can believe it, her new book is even scarier than the last one, in part because Katherine is really good at knowing what's coming down the pipeline. It's called Money, Lies, and God Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. It is a lighthearted, illustrated children's book. I'm kidding, it's terrifying. But it's also clarifying because she contextualizes what we are seeing in the news right now. The book really shows the connection between Christian nationalism, wealth, and the death of American democracy. So let me bring Katherine in here. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for doing this. Let me start off by just asking you, your title is Money, Lies, and God. What is the bigger problem right now? Is it billionaires using the treasury as an ATM, or Christian nationalists using their majorities to impose their faith on everyone else? Like, should I be more worried about the funders or the fundies?
Well, they're all really important. I titled the book Money, Lies, and God because first, money is a huge part of the story, meaning that huge concentrations of wealth at the very tippy top of the economic spectrum have really destabilized the political system in interesting ways. And there's a sector, look, there are a lot of very rich people in America, but only a sector of the very rich have invested a portion of their fortunes in anti-democratic projects, and they're the ones sort of funding this movement. Second, lies or conscious disinformation, propaganda is another really huge feature of this movement. And number three, God, because the most important ideological framework for the largest part of this movement is Christian nationalism. Religious nationalism plays a central role because for the rank and file, it's really a key way of legitimizing their support for the movement. This is a movement that quite clearly has set itself against the Constitution and America's democratic ideals, but leaders of the movement know that they need to kind of get the rank and file on board, and many of them have been brought up to be deeply patriotic. So Christian nationalism is kind of a form of identity politics, and it's a way to get them in on that sort of agenda.
I've been really interested in that merger, it seems, between the religious side and the patriotic side. You've been reporting and writing about this movement for several years. I've been doing the same thing, and I'm wondering, in your opinion, how has that movement changed over the past few decades, especially in terms of priorities and access?
Oh my gosh, such a big question, such a great question. The movement has shifted and has, I would say, unprecedented political power today because of the investment in the movement over the last few decades. The amounts of money are enormous. I mean, I started writing about this movement in 2016. As you know, the movement is leadership driven and also organization driven. There are all of these different organizations that work together to make up the movement. And I'll just give you one example. I think when I started researching this movement, the annual operating budget of the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is one of the key legal advocacy organizations of the religious right, was something like $30 million a year, which was a lot. Today, it's over $102 million a year. So the amounts of money have really ballooned thanks to funders like Barry Side, a Chicago billionaire who donated $1.6 billion, that's billion with a B, to form the Marble Freedom Trust, and he put Leonard Leo in charge of it. So a lot of money buys a lot of law, a lot of money buys a lot of disinformation operations, it buys a lot of lies, and it sort of gets everybody on board. I mean, this is an incredibly well-funded movement, and as a consequence of all that funding and organization, they have unprecedented political power.
Is that funding coming primarily from religious zealots who want to and impose their religious will on the country, or is it coming from like wealthy Republicans who don't actually care about religion, but they see it as a useful tool?
I think two things can be both true. I mean, when I feature the funders of the movement, I'm talking about people like the Corkerys or Sean Filer, who are Catholic. I'm talking about Barry Seid and Jeff Yass, who are both Jewish, I believe. I'm thinking about people like the DeVos Prince family juggernaut, who or I would think about like Tim Dunn or the Wilkes brothers or Richard Uihlein. I think, well, maybe you.
He's from my home state of Illinois.
Right,
So,
exactly.
but yeah, like those are not religious figures as far as I've ever known them. Those are political figures,
Well, some of
right?
them really are. I mean, some of these funders are really religious, but religiously, they're all over the place, right? They're evangelical, they're Protestant, they're Catholic. A couple of them are Jewish. Some of them are actually, when you dig into it, like they really seem to believe in nothing more than themselves. I'm looking at you, Elon Musk. But what they're really doing is kind of investing a portion of their fortunes in these anti-democratic projects. And what they want, you know, is they want economic policies that are going to justify and increase their wealth. They want a deregulatory environment for their businesses. If they're in polluting businesses, they don't want any environmental regulations. Some of them care about the culture wars more than others. Some of them don't seem to care about them at all. They just see it as the price of doing business. We get the little people on board with the, by dangling the shiny baubles of the culture wars in front of them. But they're, basically united in their need to their desire to crush liberalism and what they call the administrative state.
One of the things that always surprises me is every time there is a new poll out about religion in the United States, it always seems to show that there is a shift away from organized religion. And there is a rise in people who are non-religious, whatever label they used to call themselves. Can you explain for me, how is it that the number of people who are involved in an organized religion, the percentage of Christians in the United States, that seems to keep going down and down, and yet they seem to also have more power than ever right now?
Well, those polls are a little bit deceptive, because what we're seeing is a kind of thinning out of the moderate middle in a lot of religions. If you look at like the mainline Christian denominations, they're graying and they're, getting older, and they're sort of not going to church as often. But you have more of a rise of sort of the hotter and harder forms of religion are on the rise. And when I say hotter, I mean sort of more reactionary, sort of like this idea of a strong God, a sort of more authoritarian form of religion. Like, for instance, one of the fastest growing religious movements in America is sort of these independent charismatic movements, which are themselves quite diverse, but like a very large sector of the independent charismatic movements are very easily given over to hard right politics.
Are we talking about like the Greg Locks, those types of guys who are just very in your face? They preach almost more politics than anything else, but they are very much, we're going to get rid of the devil. Satan is responsible for anything.
Well, when I talk about independent charismatic movements, I'm talking about people like Lance Wallnau and everybody sort of in his sphere. And the New Apostolic Reformation, for instance, which is one example of a kind of this type of religion. And many of folks on this in this kind of sphere believe in seven mountains dominionism, the idea that only Christians of a certain type, a certain reactionary variety, should dominate the key features or mountains or molders, as they call it, of culture, which includes government, education, media, finance, and things like that. So it's a very anti-democratic ideology. And yes, you've got the sort of John MacArthur's or the other folks who are representative of very sort of strict and reactionary forms of the Christian faith, which are also growing their networks. And meanwhile, sort of like this sort of more progressive Christian networks tend to be sort of dying out or thinning out. Along with that comes a rise of people who don't identify with any religion as well, and that group too is very diverse in its relationship to religion and non-religion.
This is a question that a viewer is curious about. What do they want to do with people who disagree? Like live and let live as long as they get to make the rules, or something more nefarious?
Well, I think that overall, what the movement leaders want to do is have a kind of almost like an imposed state form of religion. They want to convey the idea that there's a correct religion, one with a sort of national, like, national stamp of approval, and an incorrect religion. They want to impose their values on our healthcare. They want to be able to impose their values on all aspects of our society. And in our public schools, they want to infuse public schools with a sort of approved religion, approved version of the Christian faith. And then, the implication will be that, all others are tolerated but disfavored. So, religious nationalism is a form of reactionary nationalism. It's this idea of who gets to properly belong in the country and who doesn't. It's actually a threat to the religious freedom of those who fail to conform to what the movement leaders see as their approved versions of the faith. And by the way, they're really taking aim at progressive forms of Christianity. The way I do my research is, I spend a lot of time in these spaces, and I was recently at the most recent event I attended was called America Fest. It's held by Turning Point USA Faith. Turning Point USA, which is Charlie Kirk's organization. He plays a huge role in voter turnout operations. He also plays a huge role in bringing young people into the movement. And there's an arm called Turning Point USA Faith, and the head of it, Lucas Miles. He spoke on a couple of occasions at America Fest, and I heard him both times. And he said, "I've made it my mission to eradicate woke Jesus from the American pulpit." And he actually, or woke Christianity, and he actually has a book he's titled Woke Jesus, and the subtitle is something like The Heresy Infecting the Christian Church, or something like that.
So goodbye to the Sermon on the Mount, and pretty much.
My gosh, he spoke very explicitly, like, what counts as heretical. He says, he literally described progressive Christianity as heretical, and he named the social gospel, which for many Christians is the gospel. So, and he said, we want to see progressive churches defunded. So I think when you look at sort of what's happening now in our government with all the sort of chaos with the, Elon Musk's 19-year-old minions marauding through the treasury and going after grandma's Social Security or whatever they're doing, we've also seen defunding of a lot of faith-based organizations that are doing charity work, feeding the poor, trying to help people with housing and other services, because those organizations are more on the sort of, I would say, moderate or progressive side.
Yeah, we just saw a lot of that with the firing of U.S. aid workers all over the world.
Right.
One of the things you write in the book, you say that this movement, this Christian nationalist movement, and I'm quoting here, represents the most serious threat to American democracy since the Civil War. And I'm wondering, why isn't that threat being felt by everyone? Like, I feel like I hear about it in my more progressive circles, but you would think, okay, if this is something like the Civil War, everyone has sides, everyone's eager to fight because they all believe they're right. And yet I feel for so many Americans, they have no clue what's going on. They don't even realize this war is happening. And I know you're trying to sound the alarm here, but most people don't seem to feel the threat. Or am I wrong on that assessment?
Well, I think that what's happening, all you need to do is open the news and read the news, and how Trump and his minions are, decapitating leadership at the CIA and the FBI, how they're eliminating, agencies that protect the consumer, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or that's like a consumer fraud bureau that has actually returned billions of dollars to Americans that has been illegally taken from them by different businesses. And they're eliminating that. They're slashing key functions of our government that we rely on to do everything from protect our nuclear weapons, to keep the planes in the air, to collect taxes. Look, of course there's room for some kind of improvement in government sector as there is in the private sector. Maybe you could cut 5% of the workforce and everybody works a little harder and it's fine. But if you keep cutting and cutting and cutting and replacing some of the most, frankly, competent people with loyalist incompetence, at a certain point, things are just going to stop working. And I think that, a lot of people voted for Trump because they justified their vote on the price of eggs. The price of eggs isn't going down. Well, it's still not going down. Price of goods is predicted to rise as a consequence of Trump's needless trade wars. He's already alienated some of our, most dear allies of the past 80 years. He's insulted Canada and Greenland and Panama. I mean, anybody who's not paying attention to this is just not paying attention at all.
So if they haven't felt it yet, they're going to feel it very soon.
This is absolutely true. I mean, maybe they're not looking at the news, but they'll certainly feel it when they see the price of cars rise because we're starting some needless trade war with Canada. I mean, this is something that authoritarian leaders do. They start these sort of needless projects of aggression on overseas, because what they need to do is, they run on promises of vengeance, and they need to target their aggression, and often they'll target it on sort of inappropriate targets abroad. So this is one of the things about authoritarian leaders. They're often very expansionist, and often just the whole point is the aggression itself.